another episode of the Freight Pod. We are joined today by a wonderful guest whose name I'm going to try not to pronounce incorrectly as we get going here. Miss Dawn Salvucci-Favier.
That was close. That was really good. Salvucci-Favier.
Salvucci-Favier. I saw the I. I just wasn't sure if it was pronounced or not. So, Dawn, thank you for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
So as we get started, as I was looking at your career, you've had quite an illustrious career in the industry, dating back to, today you're the CEO of Greenscreens, a top vendor to our space, recently recognized in the Freight Tech 25 via FreightWaves, which is an awesome accolade. But before we get into that, let's take it all the way back. So you started your career on the shipper side of the business, am I right?
I did, yeah, way back in 1992, I think.
1992. So you joined TJX Companies as a transportation administrator. What was your job as you kind of got into that role?
Yeah, so it's funny because my resume has my first position there as a transportation administrator. My first job there was actually the administrative assistant to the VP of transportation. So I started as an admin and, typing up his letters and doing his filing and approving check payments and doing all of that. But through working for him for about a year, I started learning more and more about the operations and about the business. And he gave me the first opportunity he presented me with was TJ Maxx was putting their national LTL business out to bid. Had been with Yellow Freight for years at the time, was putting it all out to bid. And he was like, hey, do you want to run this bid for us? And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? First it was just typing up the bid documents that were going to go out to all of these national and regional LTL carriers. But then as the responses started coming back, he's like, do you want to do the analysis? And just kind of with a little bit of mentoring from him. So he gave me a lot of opportunities and imagine me, the admin to the department, then taking my findings and analyzing this multi-million-dollar LTL bid, presenting it back to the executive team and saying, you need to change LTL carriers and you need to make a change. It doesn't make sense to stay with this company just because you're comfortable with them. And so that was kind of my first entry into the operations side of it. So then I did move into the position was called the transportation administrator. And really it was managing TJ Maxx's inbound freight. We were one of the first retailers to take ownership of our inbound freight. So we were managing all of the freight from all of our vendors across the United States into I think we had 4 distributions. I think when I started 3 distribution centers, 4 by the time I left. It was at a time when TJ Maxx was opening like 100 new stores a year. So their huge growth period. Started as a smaller retailer in New England and then grew nationally and actually globally by the time I left the company. But so we were just working with the vendors in all of the different regions. We didn't have a TMS at the time. We were taking phone calls. Hey, we had a routing guide. Anything that was over 5,000 pounds or 750 cubic feet through most of the country, the vendors needed to call us for routing, right? And, if we thought that we might be able to consolidate loads, again, one of the first companies to build multi-stop inbound loads. We were doing that manually. I was talking to somebody else about it. Maps on the walls with tacks in it and sticky notes on the credenzas that had the order information from these vendors. We were, typing stuff into a Paradox database. This is like predated Access even, is how we were doing that. And we were all incented as essentially load planners is what we were to consolidate loads to save money. We used PC Miler to calculate out of route miles. It was crazy. There was no TMS, nothing, and that's how I started. So I just talked for a long time, but I'll pause there.
So dating back 30-ish years, you were in a way already starting to optimize data for better, decision making in freight. It's come
Yeah,
full circle. Now we're doing
absolutely.
the same thing. So,
Absolutely. Except
what
my
did
technology is better than a map with some tags and some sticky notes now. So, yeah.
I would hope so as a technology provider that you
Yeah.
have more than that today.
And Lotus 123 pre-WYSIWYG, that's how old I am. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mean those are words. I don't know what they mean. Those that went
Exactly.
right over my head. So
Some of your audience will understand it.
I was what you would call a toddler when you were taking this role.
Oh, no,
Um,
that's not fair.
sorry, I was born in '90, so
That's okay.
uh, what did the landscape look like? I mean, were there a bunch of carriers calling you for business? I mean, I assume if you were the admin to the VP of transportation that you were getting solicited to some
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that? What was it like back then? Was it just, hey, can I haul for you? And you're like, yeah, sure. There's not that many competitors, or was it actually like you had to sell, or how did that look?
No, it was actually more competitive than that. And TJ Maxx, obviously, being even at the time a publicly traded company, right? There was a lot of financial. So I mentioned earlier that part of my job as the admin is I had to physically approve any check that our finance department cut that was more than, I think, I want to say $5,000 or something, where it was like it needed VP approval, any check that was more than that. So there was a lot of financial controls in place, and there were a lot of carriers that wanted our business. And, we probably had carriers every day, or at least many times a week, visiting us in person to try to win our business. And a lot of our truckload business was more regional, right? Because we had regional distribution centers that were servicing our stores on the outbound. Now, some of the inbound freight was moving more nationally, but we did a lot of intermodal at the time, right? Did a lot of work with the hub group, moving intermodal freight cross country. But yeah, no, there was a lot of carriers that wanted our business. And after I had spent some time just working on the inbound merchandise, our construction department, so as I mentioned, we were opening 100 stores a year at the
Hmm.
time, asked our department to take over the management of deliveries into the new store construction sites. So, store fixture deliveries, store supply deliveries, pre opening, and things like that. So, I actually got to create that program from scratch. We were not managing any of that freight. And if you think about store fixture deliveries in its air ride blanket wrap for a lot of the glass cases and some of the laminated wood products. So again, I had to create this program that was some LTL, it was some regular truckload, but it was a lot of air ride blanket wrap. And that's when I really started getting solicited directly for our business, was from, we were using household goods carriers, because they had the air ride blanket wrap equipment, things like that. So that was really exciting. So I got to move out of kind of the merchandise inbound freight and start a whole new program around store fixtures, store supplies, and things like that. As TJ Maxx was expanding into the UK and then into Alaska and Hawaii, I also had the opportunity then to start our store delivery program for store fixtures and initial merchandising of the stores overseas. So then I had to get into some ocean freight as well, right? So it wasn't import export of merchandise, but it was moving those store fixtures and the store supplies into those locations as we were expanding.
So you got a very well-rounded kind of education by firestorm in the
Yeah.
industry. I'm curious. I mean, did you kind of luck into the like? Did you have intent on I want to be in supply chain, or this was the
No.
job that was available, so you took it? Like, how did that all come to be?
No, it was, you know what? Like I said, I was the admin to the VP. That was my career path at the time. I was a young mother. I had my first child at 19, my second at 24. I was working for benefits and food, right? I mean, that's essentially the way it was. And I just happened to land in, frankly, a really rewarding situation where I worked for someone who saw something in me, was willing to mentor me and willing to teach me. I often say some of it was right place at the right time with the right mentor, but part of it is seizing the opportunities that are presented to you as well. And, as I got into it, I found I actually kind of have a knack for this, right? I'm actually okay with it, which kind of led to how I ended up in tech as well. because while I was at TJ Maxx, I mentioned we had no TMS. It was map tax but then the TMSs started to kind of be more common, and of course they all wanted our business too. So I got to participate in the selection of our TMS and then the implementation of it and then the training of the rest of the staff on it, and started realizing, okay, I have a knack for technology as well. It was at that time, though, that the gentleman who I was working for at TJ Maxx left the company and went to work for Staples. So, both in the Boston area, both retailers, they don't compete with each other except for talent. I'm not sure if it's still that way, but back in the 90s, they definitely competed with each other for talent. So, he left and went to Staples, and they at that time were not doing their own inbound transportation. It was all vendor prepaid. And they were starting an inbound transportation department. So he brought me with him to start the inbound transportation function at Staples, which was a very different distribution type of distribution. If you think about TJ Maxx, it's all opportunistic buying. You go to a TJ Maxx, you might find that the training that every employee needed to have when they started at TJ Maxx, they called it the life of a red blouse back then. And it was essentially supply chain plan training for every employee that they understood the journey of that red blouse from the vendor to our store to the consumer, right? But if you think about a TJ Maxx experience, it's all mostly it's changed a little bit, but back then it was all opportunistic buy. You go in, you find that red blouse. Today, you may never find that red blouse again. And you certainly might not find it at another store, right? So there was
Yeah.
no inventory replenishment type of thing. Where at Staples, it was all inventory replenishment, right? Very different distribution supply chain process than what I had learned at TJ Maxx. But part of starting up an inbound transportation function, particularly one where it was all vendor managed freight, was we first needed to start negotiating freight allowances with our vendors. So that was another big analysis project of what
Was
are
that
we
not being done prior? They were just delivering and charging.
prepay. It was mostly prepay and add. So they were prepaying the freight and adding it to the merchandise invoice,
Got
right?
it.
So, there was and the reason, by the way, they wanted to take control of their inbound freight was for inventory purposes. They wanted better visibility to when the freight was actually going to be hitting the dock so that they could do a better job of managing inventory and order cycles and all of that. So that's why we started it. But part of that was upfront negotiating with these vendors, big vendors, right? Think about, IBM and some of the big furniture vendors and technology vendors and paper vendors that they were dealing with, uh, to allow us to take over the freight through a freight allowance, where they would essentially give us an allowance to move the freight every month that we would deduct from the merchandise invoice. So that was the first part of it. And then it was hiring and building the team, and actually starting to bringing the carriers on that wanted to run our inbound business, because most of the outbound business was either moving on a private fleet or dedicated, right? So
Yep.
we had to find the contract carriers that wanted to move our freight, and so put the business out to bid again. And then it was the TMS implementation. So that was then the second cycle that I went through with selecting and implementing and training on a TMS. Um, Working at Staples, we had a lot of support from the IT department during the implementation. Once we went live, if it was a critical issue, we got that support. But my big eye opener was I said, to our DBA, our database administrator, hey, I need this report. I need this data to be pulled out of the TMS. And she said, well, just write a SQL report, an SQL report. And I'm like, what's that? Like, I don't know what that is. And she was like, oh, I'll teach you. So taught me how to write SQL. The TMS that we were using at the time ran on a Unix server. It was actually a server in our data room that ran, and they gave me a key to the data room so I could go reboot the Unix server, and taught me like the command line prompts that I needed to type in on the server. And so that was my first introduction to tech, was then working at Staples. So I moved out of the transportation department eventually into IT at Staples as a business analyst, working on mostly transportation, but across all of the supply chain applications at Staples in kind of a business analyst support requirements, project management type role. Um, and
So
that,
this was the late '90s,
yeah,
and you're working with a TMS, and I can't imagine that technology then was robust in terms of its the quality, so to speak. I'm just curious, did it really get the job done, or was it kind of bare bones, like a lot of patchwork stuff? Like, what did the world of TMS even look like
yeah.
at that point?
So I'll contrast the TMS that we initially bought at TJ Maxx, which they've replaced later, which is another part of my journey. But that TMS was really, I would call it more of it was a database with a nice front end for order entry and things like that. But it did have some lightweight load consolidation capabilities, right? It wasn't super robust, certainly nothing like what we have available today, but it did have the ability based on parameters that we would set up in the system to, rather than us as load planners using our maps and tacks and sticky notes building multi-stop loads, it did actually have the ability to do that. But it was pretty basic, right? The TMS we selected and implemented at Staples was actually from a company called Manugistics that was later acquired by JDA Software, which is now Blue Yonder. So that was a much more sophisticated, much more robust TMS offering with more advanced optimization capabilities. It had automated load tendering, auto retender. It had freight payment and audit capabilities, right? So it was, but I would say it was still the very early stage of TMS and optimization. At the time, there were really two primary competitors in the space at the time. I2 Technologies and Manugistics were really the two companies that were going head to head, and both were full supply chain companies that happen to have TMS technology with optimization.
What did manugistics stand for? There's got to be manual logistics, less manual.
Manufacturing logistics.
That makes a
So
little bit more
they,
sense than what I
yes,
was
they,
suggesting.
yeah, they actually started out in kind of the manufacturing floor, right? Optimizing some of those processes, and actually acquired a company called Rover Technologies that had the TMS as they started building out their offering.
So you kind of make the jump from TJX to Staples, kind of following your boss's lead, someone who you looked up to, who had been a mentor for you, who had probably taken you from someone who was just working to pay the bills and get the benefits, to all of a sudden someone who sees a career for herself.
Yeah,
Is that the right way to maybe
yeah,
articulate that?
absolutely.
Um, and then you make a jump from Staples to manufacturing logistics slash manugistics.
Yeah.
Um, I assume that came from your familiarity with the product and interest as a result. Like, what led to that jump? I mean, I assume you're
Yeah.
leaving now the mentor who you'd worked for. What
No,
kind of inspired that?
he had already actually left the company. So he left the company, retired, prior to me leaving transportation and moving over to IT. He had already left. The move over to Manugistics, so we obviously were a customer and I was the super user of the system. So I was the primary contact, and we were also an early adopter of their freight audit technology. So I think, Andrew, what it really came down to was I was a pain in the ass, and they said, "Do you want to just come work for us?" Is really what it came down to, because they had an opening in their product management team. It was really early stage of their freight audit technology. I was an early adopter. I had a lot of ideas on how they could improve it. And it's funny because after I left Staples and went to TJ Maxx, the majority of the enhancement requests from customers were from me as a customer. And we would have our user group meeting that I ran, where part of that meeting is we would go through all the customer enhancement requests, and customers would vote on them and could ask questions. But I would have to explain what the Staples enhancement requests were for, because so that's really kind of how that transition happened.
And you had no background in technology that made you a good necessarily fit for this. Why do you think this was something that you were good at?
Um, I think I just had an aptitude for it, and I always had an interest in it. It's funny, if I go all the way back to high school, I took a word processing class, and I took, my high school had Apple IIe computers in the mid 80s. Again, I'm dating myself. You weren't even a glimmer in your father's eye at that time, but we had a computer lab, and I took a programming class in high school where I actually had to write code on punch cards, and so I always had an interest in technology and kind of an aptitude for it. But I suck at math. That's the thing that I could never figure out is I sucked at math. I Geometry, forget it. Like algebra, I was okay at, but just kind of had an aptitude for it. I didn't have a background in logistics either, and literally when I started as the admin, I was like, which one pulls the truck and which one gets pulled? The difference between a tractor and a trailer, like legit. I am not lying. That's when I first started there, and it was just, I guess it was just a hunger to learn, right? It was just really looking to learn and absorb and just an aptitude for it.
What would you say, maybe some lessons that you've learned? I mean, there are a lot of people who probably have followed a similar path or seek to follow a similar path of you because you moved to Manugistics and you spend really 10 years at the company, rising the ranks from senior product manager eventually to a VP. And I guess, it's got to be inspiring for people who maybe don't have the pedigree or some, super fancy college degree of saying that, they've done this, that, or the other, but still want to rise the ranks in a company. Like, what are some lessons that you think you could take away from your experience that others could follow and allow themselves to see that same kind of trajectory growth?
Yeah, look, I mean, I had the opportunity to, one of my former employers, they started a mentorship program, and they actually did ask me to come back and speak to the employees about it. And I think that's the key thing. And it's, recognizing when you have somebody who is taking you under their wing and is willing to mentor you and listen to them. But your mentors may come in places that you wouldn't expect them to, right? So that first mentor that I mentioned, that is kind of an expected place to find a mentor. But if I look back in my career, I've had many mentors at different stages in my career, and they haven't always been that, someone in a higher ranking position or someone superior to me. Sometimes it's a peer. Sometimes it's somebody who reports to me where I'm learning from. And then there's the mentors that are outside of work, right? You've got your personal spirit guide, the people who help you kind of work through some of those professional conundrums that you come against, and that might be a friend or a family member. But I think the key point there is recognizing the opportunities that you're being presented with and seizing them and working hard and taking the help that is offered to you. I still to this day I say I never ever go into any situation believing that I'm the smartest person in the room. I think that there is something that I can learn from every experience, every conversation. Um, Specifically professionally. In my personal life, there are some times where I'm like, oh, I am definitely the smartest person in this room. But no, but
I was feeling that was a jab at your husband, maybe.
no, no. My husband is a musician though, so he plays at a lot of local bars. So it's really, and I live in Florida, so Florida man, that it's. But anyway, no, but professionally, it's there's a lot that you can learn, and it's not just from the people who are higher up than you or have more experience than you. Sometimes it's things that you learn from your peers, from your customers, from the people that you are supposed to be mentoring. Sometimes you can learn a lot from that. So I think it's really just work hard, recognize the opportunities, seize them, and keep your head up. Don't let your head get too big. Don't take yourself too seriously.
So something that you didn't exactly say, but I'm just kind of picking up on it as a theme is kind of leaning into curiosity. And it just seems like with each of these roles, it wasn't necessarily like, hey, your job description to do this, this, and this, but you saw something that you were interested in, you saw an opportunity, and you kind of jumped at both. And the reason I bring it up is because when you talk about mentorship, and I think about my own path and, being when I was CEO at Molo, there were people that I found I was more interested in trying to help than others. Not that I wasn't interested in helping others, but
Sure.
the people who I felt like I was always most interested in trying to help were the ones that kind of showed the most initiative and curiosity, and the people who were speaking up and saying, hey, I'm interested in this, can you tell me more about it? And it's when those people kind of do that that you just think as a leader, like, this person's really showing initiative, I do want to help them. So it's kind of self-fulfilling in that, like, as an individual in a company, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking about their own path, it's like, show that initiative, show that curiosity, and there's a high likelihood that that will attract leaders to want to support you and want to help you get that next step in your career. Does that kind of jive with how you feel like your experience has been?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think you're right on with that. And I think, be inquisitive, ask questions. Sometimes it's not even a matter of well, I think sometimes by asking the questions, you show that you're interested, right? Or, so what
100%.
is that? Why are we doing that? Why do we do it that way and not in a snarky way? Um, though I would say another thing that I think has really helped me along the way is being able to speak truth to power, if you will, doing it in a respectful way always, right? So I'll go back to that story about the LTL bid, where it was like we had this leadership team that they had been working with Yellow Freight for 7 years. They were very comfortable in that relationship, but we stood to save $35 million by changing, right? I mean, that's a lot of money. And it's like, why are we not changing? And I was just the admin, right? But I was like, but I looked at the data and it doesn't make
You weren't
sense,
you
right?
weren't great at math, but you could do that math to
Yeah.
say that this was a change we should maybe consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think you're right on with that.
So you ended up spending what, 12, 13 years at, I guess, the combined companies that became JDA. Is that right?
Yeah. So it was ten years at Manugistics and then through the JDA acquisition. I did leave there in 2010. They acquired I2 Technologies. I helped with that transition. And then I was actually offered the opportunity to go be COO and president of a small boutique TMS company based out of Charleston, South Carolina. Best move of my life was moving to Charleston. It's a wonderful city. Um, and I worked with them for a while, but then we were acquired by Red Prairie. So we were a reseller of Red Prairie technology, and we were acquired by Red Prairie, and I stayed on with the company. We actually became a business unit within Red Prairie, and I ran that business unit as general manager and then moved into a global strategy role for Red Prairie. So altogether, 3 years between being at that small boutique company and then being acquired by Red Prairie. So that kind of took me from 2010 to 2013. Um, and then JDA and Red Prairie merged, acquired. I'm still not sure exactly what that was, but
Mm-hmm.
so yes, total of 13 years with companies that are now Blue Yonder.
And so 13 years there, and then you make the, well, I guess 13 combined years there
Yeah,
with the kind of little side quest, um, before being a member of the founding team of 3G TMS.
that's right.
So what was the impetus there to leave and do your own thing or start a company? I mean, what a vast change from
Yeah.
being an admin to this. What was going through your mind as that part of your journey was beginning?
Yeah, so the merger of Red Prairie and JDA, I would be lying if I didn't say was a complete shock. I will actually never forget. I was chaperoning my son's he was auditioning for All State Choir or something, and I was chaperoning, and my phone started lighting up. WTF? What happened? How do you feel about this? And I'm like, I have no idea what anybody's talking about because I'm on a school bus full of high school kids. And so I open up my email. And so, anyway, it was a real shock. And clear to me that, okay, I've been there, done that, left there, not something that I want to do again. Not that I had any hard feelings, it's just I didn't want to go back there. So I made the decision to leave and kind of had socialized that with some of my network. And I had a friend who called me and said, "Hey, I want to introduce you to somebody who is thinking of starting a new TMS. Are you interested?" And I said, why the hell would anybody start another TMS company right now? The market is so saturated with TMS vendors. The market doesn't need another TMS, but yes, I'd be happy to talk to them.
What?
So, but I went in again, going in with an open mind, but I was kind of like, I don't know if the market really needs another TMS, but sure, I will talk to him. And as it turned out, the gentleman who I was being introduced to was a man named Mitch Wesley, who the name 3G comes from it being the third generation of TMSs that he had founded. So
Huh.
Mitch was the original founder of a company called Wesley Software, which was acquired by McHugh Software, which became Red Prairie. So the Red Prairie TMS was essentially originally founded by Mitch Wesley as Wesley Software. So he had started that TMS back in the 90s. He also then went on to found a company called Glog, which is now OTM, Oracle Transportation Management.
Yep.
And he, after selling Glog to Oracle, had left the company and went and did some other things for a while. And then 3G was kind of his next venture. And in talking to him about the mission of that company, and really, we were very much aligned on the fact that we felt at the time the mid-market shippers and 3PLs was grossly underserved by the Oracles and the JDAs and the large companies, large TMS providers out there. So we really kind of had a mission of bringing a TMS solution to market that was truly cloud-based, right? Because it was early cloud days. I think a lot of the TMSs still hadn't made that migration. So a truly cloud architected, cloud-based, multi-tenant TMS that was really geared more towards the mid-market shipper and 3PL, because the cost of some of those other TMSs was just so exorbitant, and they were not at the time cloud-based, multi-tenant, right? All of those economies of scale that you get from that. And he just had really such a compelling vision, a compelling story and background, and we were really aligned on what the market needed. So it really kind of became a no-brainer for me. Now,
So
coincidentally, as that was happening, I did get laid off. So it made it real easy to make the decision. And I was only out of work for like 3 weeks, right? In between being laid off and starting.
help me understand. You're part of the origin team there. What did that look like? What was your role?
Yeah.
And what was, you said that the market was so saturated for TMSs. I understand that you were going to target the middle market, but at that point, what was going to be different? What was the differentiator for 3G TMS versus the
Yeah.
competitors out there?
Yeah, I mean, look, and in the TMS space in general, and I believe still today, it is hard to differentiate in the TMS space. But so I'll kind of go back to your question. My role there, so I believe when the company actually was started, um, as far as 3G employees, I believe I was employee number 3 or employee number 5. And as the company was formed, they acquired a company based out of Raleigh that had a really powerful LTL rating engine and a lightweight TMS. So essentially, the acquisition was made so that we didn't have to completely start from scratch. We were acquiring a very powerful LTL rating engine, which is very hard to build, right? So
Yep.
we got that head start. My role in the company was essentially head of product strategy, product management. I did have a counterpart who was the head of engineering development, so more of the technical side. But the two of us worked very closely. I was really more requirements, strategy, go to market, where he was actually the technical side of it. We when we so as I started, there was a team of executives that were coming from other, from SAP, from Oracle, from others. They had to stay at their previous jobs because bonus payout, things like that. So we kind of worked for about 2 months with just a skeleton team of people kind of putting our heads together and strategy. And, we had an architect that was working to build the architecture but we weren't writing any real feature function at the time. It was just building the architecture. Before the entire executive team then joined, and we were able to really strategize and put together a business plan. But the differentiation was for us was going to be, the multimodal, powerful optimization, powerful rating, fully cloud-based, at scale for the mid-market, right? Because there were some mid-market solutions out there, but they didn't have the powerful route optimization, right? Multi-stop, continuous move, consolidation, all of that, that the bigger, more expensive TMSs did really, really well. But guess what? The founders of this company were the ones that built those bigger, more powerful products. So that was really going to be the differentiation was cloud architecture from the ground up, scalable, powerful optimization with LTL, with really what we felt was one of the best LTL rating engines in the market at the time. So that was kind of how that all started.
And were you selling more into shippers or 3PLs? Or was
We
it a healthy
thought
mix?
we were going to sell more into shippers. That was kind of the plan. However, just like we're in a market cycle now where the shippers are buying technology and the 3PLs and brokers are not, we were on the other side of that cycle when we started the company in 2013. So it was 3PLs and the brokers that were actually spending money on technology at the time. So we sold our first six customers, all of whom were 3PLs or brokers, before we had written a single line of code.
Really?
So the architecture was there, but as far as
Yeah.
functionality, those six companies bought in on the vision. They signed a contract on the vision. Um, we might have had some wireframe mock-ups of what a user experience might look like or whatever, but it was really the vision of the company and the expertise of the team that was running the company and building the product that those first six customers bought in on.
And so you help grow this organization over a what 7 year period? Is that right?
7 years, yeah, I was there.
Um, and was this your first foray into really leading the whole org in terms of product and at that scale, like
Um, so
from inception in terms of building it, right?
From inception, yes. So from inception, I had, let's say, my last 2 or 3 years at JDA, and then my entire time at Red Prairie was in a product strategy, product leadership position. But to your point, it was not building the product from scratch. It was maintaining and enhancing a legacy product that had pre-existed.
What did you learn from that kind of entrepreneurial journey of building
Yeah.
from scratch? Like, what are some of the lessons you took from that in building technology that people who haven't yet done that maybe wouldn't quite understand?
Startups are not for the faint of heart is what I learned. And it's funny because when
That
I
I
had
know.
Yes, yes. When I had that initial conversation with Mitch, I actually said to him, I was like, look, this opportunity does not fit my risk profile, right? I was like, I have two children in college, or I had one in college, one about to go into college. So tuition bills, just all of these things. And I'm like, "Ugh, startups are so risky. They're so dangerous. This does not fit my risk profile." But again, he had a compelling story and a compelling vision. And it was, it didn't hurt that he was like, I'm going to make you a millionaire. And I was like, oh, great. You're going to make me a millionaire. But
We're gonna make us a million.
yeah, right. Exactly. So what did I learn? I mean, look, working for a startup is very different than working for a large corporation. I mean, I said it at 3G, I was employee number three, number five. When I joined Manugistics, I think I was employee number 1200,
Yep.
right?
Very, very different.
And then having worked for Staples and TJX, I had come from a big corporate America background, publicly traded companies, and now suddenly working in this startup, very, very different. Not for the faint of heart. I thought I worked hard before that. No. Never worked as hard in my life as I have since I've moved over into the startup world. You have to be flexible, right? I think that's critical is flexible in many ways. Flexible, like in my mind, a product roadmap. It should be a 3-year roadmap, and that's what you go to market with. When you're in a startup, you can't possibly produce a 3-year roadmap. And frankly, I'm at the point now where I'm like, nobody, no matter how established you are, should have a 3-year roadmap because the world and the market just changes way too quickly that anything and frankly, if I look back at the 3-year roadmaps I had, how often did I actually execute on anything I thought I was going to do 3 years from now? Maybe at the highest level, like, oh, in 3 years, we're going to go into ocean freight. Maybe. I don't know. So I think flexibility is key in what you think you're going to build from product, what you think the market is going to need. who's buying? Like I said, we founded the company thinking mid-market shippers were going to be our core customers, and it ended up being that it was really brokers and 3PLs that were our core customers for the first 18 to 24 months, right? There was that. And then even hiring people and attracting talent. When you're a startup, A, you don't have the money to pay the salaries that some of the more experienced and talented people in the market want. B, you don't have the credibility, the risk profile. As I said, it didn't fit my risk profile. Why would I want to leave a really stable company to come work for a startup? So you have to be really flexible in your expectations and just be able to adapt to where the market is taking you.
So your comment on hiring and credibility in the early days, that's so valid. And I think about it from my experience in building Molo, a brokerage. Granted, it's a different type of company. It's still a startup. And I remember the hiring we did, our worst hiring was in our first year. I mean, we
Sure.
did get plenty of great people in that first year, but we also had some of the, I guess, I don't want to say worst, but like the most that didn't fit, because people don't believe you. I mean, people don't think you're going to be able to pay your bills. They just don't think you're going to make it, whatever. And it's funny because I've had people ask me recently, like, would you start another brokerage whenever your non-compete ends? And I'm like, I think about it, like, maybe. But
Yeah.
as I think about, like, the early days being some of the hardest, what would it be like to do that again? I'm like, damn, what would be a lot easier the second time around is hiring. And the credibility is obviously
Yeah.
100x what it was the first time around. And it'd be a lot easier to get the right people on the bus early versus the first time around when you have no idea what you're doing. I mean, I feel like a lot of it in the early days of building a startup is trying to solve problems that a week ago you didn't even know existed.
Right.
And so when you think about that too in building software, it's not like, for my business, for example, for Molo, when there was a problem, it was often fairly easy to throw bodies at it to solve it. So it's like,
Right.
you're not executing this one of, okay, quickly add bodies and we'll service the customer better. You can't exactly do that in software. Like if it takes time to build something, like how do you navigate that when something breaks early on, and you have customers expecting things to change? Like, well, how do you navigate that from your end?
Yeah, look, my favorite saying in software, and I usually say this when I'm addressing my board, is 9 women can't have a baby in 1 month, right? It is not, to your point, you just can't throw bodies at the problem and solve it faster in many cases. In some cases you can. Um, I think really to answer your question is, there's pressure coming from a lot of places. So I'll address the customer something breaks issue. I think, the first thing that we try to do when something breaks and we realize, oh shit, it's going to take a long time to fix this, is to identify a workaround. Is there a suitable workaround that is sustainable for the customer until we can give a more permanent full solution, right? And it
Yep.
might even be that, okay, there's a temporary workaround, then there's a midterm solution that might not be the 100% solution, but we can deliver X in 3 weeks, right? Or whatever. But the permanent solution is going to take us 2 months. Um, the good news is that I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever had an experience where something broke, where it was like, we're not going to be able to fix it for 2 months, right?
Yeah.
It could be a bug that might take us several days, but that the first thing is there a workaround? If there's not a workaround, the priority and the severity of that issue for your engineering team needs to escalate immediately. And it also depends on what is the issue. Is it a nuisance issue that, users are just complaining about it, or is it broke? Like they
Yeah.
can't run their
Code red.
business, right? Yeah, it's code red. But immediately is there a workaround for it? I think the other part on the customer side is maybe it's not necessarily broke, but the customer, whether because, and I've not had this at Greenscreens, I may have had it in other places where sales may have misset expectations with a customer on what something can be, and then the customer gets into implementation and they're like, well, wait a minute, that's not what I expected. No, that's not acceptable, right? That is the other area where it's like, okay, is there a workaround that we can get you through temporarily while we build out? Because new functionality will generally take longer to build than just fixing something that's broken, right? And there
Yep.
could be features. I mean, look at Greenscreens today. There's some features that we've been working on for 6 months, especially with kind of what we do today with data science and machine learning. I like to say, in R&D, research and development, the R often takes longer than the D, right? It's the research to understand even how to solve the problem takes 10 times longer than once you've identified how to solve it, writing the code to do it, right? So there's that part of that. And then there was a second part of your question I don't think I answered. So something broke,
No,
customer expectations weren't met. Yeah.
you
So,
answered the question, so
okay.
I appreciate that. And I think as we kind of navigate moving from, you've kind of introduced green screens now into the conversation, and I think that's the meat of kind of why we're here. So I think um, you spent 7 years building 3G TMS, so that's your first foray into kind of entrepreneurship, or at least kind of founding or being a part of a founding team in a business. And then you make the jump to green screens, but it's not right away. Kind of walk the audience, or walk us through kind of that process. You leave in what was essentially a baby for you,
Yeah.
that you spent 7 years at, and what'd you do next before making the commitment to join green screens?
Yeah, so it was interesting how that happened. I mean, I think I it was early 2020, and I had really just gotten to the place. I still have many friends. I have no ill will. I love 3GTMS. We're partners with them, but I've really just gotten in a place in my own head where I got to be careful how I say this, because I'm not by any means saying that the company was toxic, but I had become toxic. Like, it was toxic to me, right? It wasn't a toxic environment, but it was toxic to me. And it had been building for a long time. And I just got to the place where I was like, I can't do this. I cannot do this anymore. And thought about it for a long time. And then end of February, I just decided to resign. Didn't have another job, because that was the other thing is I was kind of like, what's my next move? I had a horrible non-compete agreement that essentially said, well, because we had an equity event, so we had a private equity firm make a major investment in the company the year prior. And through that, restrictive covenants with that agreement, from the date of the investment event, I could not work for another TMS provider for 4 years. So as I was sitting there, knowing that I was really unhappy, and in my head saying, I have all this equity built up, 20 years of equity built up in the TMS, space in tech. What am I going to do? Right? Because I can't do this
That's what
anymore.
you know.
Yeah, that's what
That's
I
your baby.
know.
That's
And I had convinced myself that my skills were so specialized that there was nothing else that I could do other than TMS. And um, but I eventually talked myself out of that. And I did resign. I didn't have another job. And in my head, I was going to take some time to kind of figure out, what is my next move going to be. I know I can't work in TMS, but there's plenty of adjacent opportunities, adjacent technology that I think I could add value in. And sure, I could even go into, I don't know, CRM or ERP or something like that, but I'm not going to add the most value there, right? My expertise is in freight and in transportation. And yes, product strategy is a thing for me too, but I'm going to add a lot more value if I can stay in this industry. So what I decided, Andrew, at that time was, I had a little bit of cushion, a little bit of flexibility. My kids were grown, no more college tuition
no more
bills, so
bills.
no
Can
more
pay their
college
own bills.
tuition. Yeah, they can pay their own bills now. Um, so I decided to start a consulting practice, and what my plan was to offer my services to either freight technology companies that needed interim CPO, chief product officer, or just needed on a contract basis help with go to market strategy, roadmap, things like that, or freight companies, 3PLs, carriers, brokers that needed to establish a technology roadmap. Because if you think back, and by the way, when I decided to resign, COVID happened 2 weeks
Yep.
later, right? So Didn't know it. I had already decided to resign, but then 2 weeks later, it was like, oh shit, what did I just do? Right. But anyway, it was at a time where digital transformation started to become a thing in our
Oh
industry,
yeah.
right? People were talking a lot about digital marketplaces and digital transformation. So that was my plan. My plan was I was going to offer consulting services, and hey, I'm kind of tired right now. So that would be a way that I can pick and choose my customers. And I actually figured out financially that if I worked 8 months out of the year, or the equivalent of 8 months out of the year, I could make the same amount of money that I was making and take 4 months off every year and just kind of work when I felt like it. So I was like, this is great. I'm going
That's
to do
more
it. Right.
easy math you could figure out.
Yeah,
That was the
right. The
right
easy
path.
math. It's you're saving 35 million and I can make the same amount of money in 8 months. That math is easy. So that was my plan. I was going to go to market, kind of put that out there to the world that, hey, folks, this is what I'm doing. If you hear of any opportunities, let me know. I stayed on with 3G as a contractor for a few months because, again, COVID happened. They were on a hiring freeze. Transition was going to take longer. So I stayed on as a contractor. So we made it a long breakup, long friendly breakup. But in the interim, I was introduced to Ben Gordon. So many people in your audience probably know Ben. He's the founder of Cambridge Capital and BGSA Advisors. My intent in kind of meeting with him, it was to pitch my consulting practice as to work with his investment banking firm, right? As they were doing M&A activity or working with companies that were already in his portfolio, doing tech due diligence, helping them out with go-to-market strategy when he makes a new investment and things like that. So I kind of went, met with him the first time, heard his story, told him a little bit about myself, and he said, well, look, I've just recently become involved in a company called Greenscreens. There was actually two companies that he had just recently become involved in that he asked me to take a look at and kind of meet with them. And, I said, would love you to take a look at them. Let me know what you think. So looked at both companies. They were both great companies. Both are still part of the portfolio, obviously. But Greenscreens was the one to me that I was like, wow, okay. And at the time, I would say that the company and the product was post hypothesis, pre MVP product, right? So there was the beginning of a product there. They had actually already engaged the first three beta customers. So NFI, Gulf Relay, RDS Logistics were really the first three. So they had already started working with them, and there was a product that was in development, but it wasn't to minimum viable product yet.
So
Um,
what was
but
the
my
hypothesis?
the hypothesis was that the pricing technology that was available to the brokerage spot market was inadequate, that it did not react quickly enough to changing markets, that it was not predictive, right? That I think we've all heard from Wall Street that past performance is not an indicator of, or past success is not an indicator of future performance, right? So it doesn't matter what happened 3 days ago or a week ago or a year ago, right? What's going to happen when that truck actually needs to move? What are you going to pay for a truck, right? So the hypothesis was that the technology that existed for the majority of the market was inadequate, that there were a lot of companies out there at the time, Convoy, obviously not anymore, but companies like Echo, like Uber Freight, like Coyote, like others that had invested literally hundreds of millions of dollars in technology. And part of that was building out the data science and the business insights and the analytics to give themselves a competitive advantage in and around pricing, right? Through pricing intelligence, through connectivity to the shippers for more instantaneous pricing, right? Dynamic pricing. So that was the hypothesis. But, sorry, I'll take a step back. But that most companies don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on developing that technology, right?
Most
There's
don't
very
have
few
$1
that do.
million
Yeah,
to
right.
invest in
Exactly.
technology.
Exactly. So how can we give the market that data science and machine learning at scale at an affordable price, and serve again, it was a mid-market play. It was, okay, the guys at the top, they've got plenty of money usually. But it was initially a mid-market play. So again, post hypothesis, pre MVP product, I was really impressed. I was like, wow, these guys, yes, yes, they're on to something. Um, but the folks that at the time were running the business had never really, they were freight people. They knew freight. They were super smart people, but they'd never really launched a commercial software product into the market before. Um, go to market strategy and just understanding the markets and how to price it and, all of those things that go with bringing a technology product to market. So
So all of a sudden, that 3G TMS experience you developed the last 7 years was starting to look pretty enticing for Ben.
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess because here I am. But no, and I went back to him with a proposal for my consulting services. I said, "Here's a proposal for an 8 week or 12 week engagement, and here are my deliverables, and here's a framework that I use to define a go-to-market strategy and do all of these things, and you know." This is what I'm going to do, and here's what it'll cost. And he was like, I'm not interested in that. We're looking for a CEO. And I was like, oh. And he was like, "Do you want the job?" And I was like, "No, actually, I
Why
really
not?
don't." Well, because remember that thing I said about I can work 8 months out of the year and make as much money as I was making before, and I didn't really have a lot of bills, so that would be enough. Yeah, yeah. I like nice things, but at the end of the day, they're things and stuff. I like to go sit on the beach and read a book, and so anyway, so initially I was like, I really don't, but Ben is a persuasive guy. Um, and we kind of went back and forth for a couple weeks on it, where I was like, no, I don't think so. And I was talking to another company that was in, adjacent TMS about opportunity as a chief product officer with them. I saw the writing on the wall that my career as a consultant was going to be pretty short-lived, but and regardless of what I did, but because after 3 weeks of not working, I was bored to death. I was like, I need to go back to work. I better find a project to work on real fast. So at any rate, we went back and forth for a while. And so the compromise, Andrew, when I joined the company, and here was my concern, and this goes back to being self-aware and never thinking you're the smartest person in the room, is as a startup and having worked at 3G, yes, I helped build the product and I helped build the company, but I was never the sales leader. I participated in the sales and worked very closely with the sales leader. I never raised money, right? Never. And again, I participated in the fundraising process to represent the product and the strategy of the company, but I was never the one who went out and sold the company to investors of why they should invest in us. And I knew as a startup where the company was at the stage. We didn't have a product to sell yet. We didn't have any intention of raising money in the short term, right? So at the time, I was like, okay, this makes sense now, but we will pretty quickly, once I get my hands on the product and the strategy, get to the point where we need a sales leader and we need somebody who has experience and knows how to raise money with investors. And I've not done any of those things. And kind of my thought process at the time, Andrew, was it's not a good look for me to be the CEO and then not, right? It's like, so but I also know my weaknesses. And it was like, someday this company is going to need somebody who knows how to do these things, and that's not me. So the compromise that Ben and I came to is I accepted the position as interim CEO and chief product officer. So if you're wondering why I have that and chief product officer as part of my title, I'm still holding on to it. Um, but so I was interim CEO for a while, but eventually we launched the product and we started selling the product. And going back to that curiosity that we talked about earlier, I learned a lot about running a sales organization, and I learned a lot about raising money. And by the way, I have one of the best teachers in the world, standing behind me to teach me about raising money, right? So, but I learned a lot about raising investment money and running a sales organization that I didn't know before. And it was probably after about a year or so that the board was like, "Are you ready to be the CEO? Like, drop the interim?" And I said yes. And they said, "You need to drop the chief product officer too." And I said no, because
So,
that's still my passion, right? The product is what I'm most passionate about. So.
so is any of that, you think, imposter syndrome to an extent of kind of not having the confidence that you could do it, or like the initial piece of rather than just kind of saying screw it, I'll figure it out and I'll get the right team around me? Like what do you think some of that was?
Um, could have been. Yeah, no, I don't know that it was necessarily imposter syndrome, but I mean, look, 30 plus years doing this, I'm kind of tired, you know? I think part of it was the question of, do I really want to work that hard for that long?
Yeah.
Because I know how the sausage is made. I know it takes 5 to 7 years to take a company from a startup to really that growth stage, larger company. You know, you want to get to 10, $20 million of revenue where before you're really kind of comfortable, right? So I think at that time it was, do I really want to work that hard for the next
Yeah.
5 to 7 years, right? Because I feel like I'm at the tail end of my career, right? I mean, back in my 30s, I said I want to retire at 55. I'm a year away from that. I'm not going to retire next year. Maybe in 4 years,
Five
but
years.
I'll never fully retire. Like I will always work, but do I want to work at this level and this pace for 15 more years? Hell no.
Yeah.
No.
Well, at least you know what you want. So I guess,
Yeah.
what was it that changed your mind to say, I'm ready. I want the reins and I want to keep my chief product officer role. What changed?
Um, well, I think it was the confidence, right? So I don't know that it was imposter syndrome, but it was a lack of confidence.
Lack
Can
of
I do
confidence.
this, right? Can I do this? But once I saw that, yeah, I can do this. Like I just raised a ton of money, right? And didn't do it by myself, right? I had a lot of help. And, it was interesting I'll go back to Mitch Wesley because Mitch, as I said, he had founded 3 companies. He was really, really good at raising investment money. When we raised our A round last year, Mitch has moved on from 3G and he's retired, but he's on the board of another company that was raising money. And he reached out and he said, I'd like you to introduce me to some of your investors. And that to me was like, yes, I've done it. Like the student becomes the master, right? So it was like just validation for me. It was like, okay, this is again, a mentor, right? Somebody who I learned about startup life and growing a business from was now coming to me and saying, could you introduce me to some of the investors that you talked to as you went through the process? And then later on, he followed up to saying, wow, they were really great investors that you introduced me to, right? So it was validating. And I think it was just having lived through it. Honestly, Andrew, it was, I hired Kevin Coombs as our VP of sales back in the end of 2021. And so he was able to take on some of that sales leadership role and has been building up a team there. You've met some of our team, at least Charm made an
Yep.
impact on you. And Meryl and Ryan. So we've got a great sales team and that engine is just kind of running now. The fundraising, as I said, learned to do it, gain the confidence in that. Just brought in a fantastic CTO, promoted one of my business analysts to be a product manager at the beginning of this year. So I think it's, again, the confidence, but also now feeling that I have the talent and I'm building a really strong team around me that I feel comfortable in being able to lead the organization to, I don't feel the weight of it is on my shoulders alone anymore because I have a really powerful team around me.
Yep. And there's something you said, in them trying in your board trying to take away your chief product officer role and you saying, nope, that's my passion. That's what I love. I love that because I think people make the mistake in building businesses of thinking that they have to fit a round peg in a square hole and say that, okay, well, an executive team must have the CEO do this, this, and this, and the COO do this, 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 and the CPO do this, and the CTO do this. And it's like, the team should do what the team is best at. You take the players that are on the team and you fit them in the roles that they make the most sense. When I think about our business at Molo, it was shifting based on the team we had. But when my role and my partner's role shifted, for the first few years, he and I both spent all the time out selling. I mean, we were just running and gunning and talking to customers as much as possible. And then we realized the business needed more from us than just that. And specifically, he was much better at kind of owning the day to day. And I was much better at just getting out in front of customers, hearing what they had to say and what they needed, and then communicating that back to him and the team, and then them executing. And it's like I just didn't necessarily have the traditional role of what a
Right.
CEO is, but I found the things I was good at and I did those, and we filled the other spots with people who were
Yeah.
really good at those things. It's just more fun that way,
It
right? And
really
I bet
is.
you are having a lot more fun now realizing you have someone like Kevin who just gets it with sales, and let him run with that,
Yeah.
and you get to focus on the things you're good at. Does that make sense? Are we?
It does. No, it does. And I have to say, Andrew, I am honestly having more fun right now than any other point in my career. And I love it. I am having so much fun. Now, I'll go back to my earlier statement that startup life is not for the faint of heart, but I am just having so much fun with it. And to your point, a big part of that is filling in the holes with the right people and the right talent. And going back to our earlier conversation about as a startup having the credibility, now the second time around, having the credibility to attract the talent. I mean, look, the CTO that we just brought in October, Matthew Harding, he was one of the early principals at Chainalytics, moved on to Transplace, stayed with Transplace for quite a while, stayed on with the Uber Freight acquisition. He was the head of data science for Uber Freight. And I, on a whim, just called him and said, I'm looking for a CTO. Are you interested? And he was like, yes, actually, I'd like to talk. And I was like, wait, what? Did you said yeah? Like I fully expected a no, and now he's our CTO, and I couldn't be happier. But it's as we were saying earlier, is look, Greenscreens has a lot of brand momentum right now, and I'm so excited for that. So that has a lot to do with it, but I think it's also that second time around of just having the credibility of knowing where to find the talent and filling in those holes and surrounding yourself with just super talented people.
Yeah. So let's talk about the product itself, right?
Sure.
So when did it first launch, and how has it kind of developed? What does it look so? Because I mean, for the masses, as far as you could, as far as I know, a lot of the people listening have no idea what Greenscreens necessarily is, other than the hypothesis you just gave. So
Sure.
let me give you a chance to kind of
Yeah.
sell it, so to speak, and help people understand what it is that you do.
Awesome. I appreciate that opportunity. So the product, as I said, I joined the company in the summer of 2020. We did do kind of a soft launch of the product in December of 2020, just really to test the messaging, get some early adopter feedback, test the pricing structure. But for all intents and purposes, we launched the product to market in April of 2021. So the product's been in the market now about 2.5 years. We have about 150 brokers on our platform. So all of our customers today are truckload brokers operating in US and Canada. So we're not into Mexican freight yet, but US and Canada. What the product does is we are a dynamic predictive pricing platform for truckload spot freight today. Now we that is going to evolve. We have some really big plans for 2024 and beyond. But right now it's focused on short-term spot freight market. We're using big data and machine learning to really do what is going to happen, not what happened, right? What did happen. And the way we do that is when we bring a new customer on, we start with a historical data file of their booked load transaction actions, so 1 to 4 years. And we will use that customer's data to train a machine learning model about the buying behavior of that company as compared to the market, right? So all of our customers contribute their data into our network. 150 brokers today. It's about $22 billion worth of very clean, real time transactional load data. So every customer gets their own personalized model that understands their freight mix, their relationships, their buying patterns, their buying behavior, and considers that to tell that individual brokerage, based on the current market conditions in this lane, this is the price that we believe you are going to buy at. Right now, what we also do is because we have that $22 billion of aggregated data, which every time we add a new customer, that data pool grows by whatever that company's revenue is. Um, we have what we call our network rate, which is also generated through a predictive machine learning engine, but it's taking all of that aggregated data, not biased by any one company's buying behavior, and saying, okay, this is what the market is going to do. This is where we think you can buy. So every customer is really getting that. Here's my rate based on my buying power, and here's what the market is doing, and very quickly can see how they compare to the market. Are they buying better than the market? Are they buying worse than the market? I mean, we have some data, some reports that we can give our customers to say, look, here are your top 100 lanes where you're buying better than the market. Go win more freight there, right? Here are your bottom 100 lanes or whatever where you are buying worse than the market. Put your carrier relations or your carrier sales reps on going and building some relationships with carriers in these
It's
lanes, right?
it's also seemingly giving them guidance on how to price their margins, right? So if it's
Yes.
saying, hey, you're buying 10% better than the Greenscreens market on Dallas to Laredo, then theoretically it's saying you have more wiggle room to charge a higher price on those lanes than if you were typically going for a 14% margin, you can maybe go
Right.
for 17% here, versus the converse lanes where you're 10% below market. It's like, if you want that business, you got to tighten up your margin profile on that lane.
Well, and we are also suggesting a sell price to the customer. So we're optimizing that buy rate, and then we're using, again, the data, win rate, um, price elasticity, right? What loads that have they won at what price, and using all of that data to then also suggest a sell price to the customer. So based on what we think you're going to pay, this is what we think you should sell it at, right? And suggesting a margin. And we give the customer sales rep tools where they can play with the margin if they want to adjust it a little bit. So we're also giving them that. And what our customers have been able to do using green screens in conjunction with some of the workflow or quote automation companies like AVRL and Tabby and Bitfreighter is really increase the amount of freight that they're able to auto bid on, right? So they're using the workflow automation tools to go out to Home Depot or P&G's load board and instantly quote the loads that are out there without a human needing to, sit on the load board hitting the refresh key all day so they don't miss those opportunities. But they're using green screens as the source of truth and so the source of quoting that. And we've seen our customers go from single digit win rates on some of these load board, customer bid boards to 30+% win rate just purely by switching over to using green screens as the means at which they're basing their bids on. And we've talked to some shippers out in the market where, one shipper told us, I can always tell which brokers I'm working with are green screens brokers
Really?
because they are quoting right on to the market. She's like, the green screens brokers are usually the ones that I'm giving my business to because they are right on the market, like the way that they're quoting my freight. So, yeah, it was pretty
Interesting.
interesting to get that feedback from a shipper.
And so, do you envision, like, what percent of the market do you envision you could capture in terms of the brokerage market over time? I mean,
Yeah,
is
I
it
mean, look, the brokerage market is huge, and again, so going back to that mid-market play thing, our sweet spot for our customers, let's say brokers between, let's say, 50 to 200 million in revenue, right? So I think there's a really big part of the market that less than 10 million in revenue that, maybe it's the single agent, the one person. And I don't know that we, at least directly, are going to be a fit for that segment of the market. Now, that being said, however, we do have several customers that we work with that are, I'll call them pre-revenue startups, right? So they're folks that have experienced at other brokerage firms, have gone on to start their own brokerage, but they are not having any revenue yet. We actually have a startup package specifically for those. So we know they don't have any data, but we're giving them access to that network rate until they start booking freight, and then we'll start working with them. So there are those startups, but those are the companies that tend to grow very quick, right? Those are the guys that are going to go from 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 plus very quickly. And we've already seen that with some of the starter customers that we've started working with. The other side of that, we right now have six of the top 25 brokers that are on our platform. And that's really all happened within the last 6 months. And what has kind of happened there, Andrew, is some of them are companies that we talked to early on and they were like, oh, aren't you cute? No, we've
Hmm.
already built this technology in-house. Um, those companies that have attempted to build it in-house, many of them have figured out that, what we do is hard, expensive, and more importantly, they're always going to be limited to their own data. So even if you're a $3 or $4 billion brokerage, somebody said this the other day and I thought it was really cool. It's like building a search engine using just your Google search history, right? I mean, it's like the only results you're ever going to get are your own results, right? So because there aren't many brokers out there that are going to willingly give their data to another broker, but as us as a neutral aggregator and anonymizer of data, right? Being able to still provide them with that machine learning, high fidelity, high accuracy, very fast pricing, that a lot of those companies have come back to us. And some of them, frankly, didn't try to build it on their own, but now that we have established credibility in the market and have shown that we're here to stay, we're not going anywhere, and we are actually delivering value, have now come back around. So I know I didn't directly answer your question on what percentage of the market do we
No, it's
think,
fine. You answered
but
it very well.
yeah. So I think there's a lot of applications on both the top and the bottom, but focused in the middle is where we
It
are.
is interesting thinking about that example of the top because using your own Google search history as your search, I guess that just makes a ton of sense. I'm curious, like how real time is it? Like you're seeing as tenders are sent, you're seeing
Yeah.
that influx. So if one shipper, for example, has a I don't know a I don't know, fire sale going on and they ship out 400% of
Yeah.
their orders that they usually would out of Dallas, but it gets split amongst 10 carriers. If they all happen to be green screen carriers, there's a chance that a broker might actually catch that in advance before they price it at their normal rate.
Yeah. I actually have a great story. So yes, the answer is yes. We're pre-integrated into 13 TMSs. So just about every brokerage focused TMS we are now pre-integrated into. So that means that, to your point, as soon as they book a load, that load hits our system and has the opportunity to influence the rate predictions. So my favorite story there is we have a customer that runs a lot of freight out of a remote manufacturing facility somewhere in remote Iowa. I don't know specifically where. And the
If it's
customer was,
Iowa, it's remote. It's fine.
yeah, okay, there you go.
So,
So it's
no
not
offense
Des
to the
Moines.
Iowa
It's not Des
folks.
Moines, but it's somewhere pretty remote. And they run a lot of freight out of there, so they know the market pretty well. And they priced a lane in our system, and we came out with a prediction that was $500 more than they believed the rate should be. So, of course, they called us and they said, we think it's broken. You need to fix it. And we were like, okay, let us take a look at it. And before we really even had a chance to dig into the data and look at it, they called back and they said, never mind. The shipper doubled production at that manufacturing facility that week, didn't tell them, at least. I don't know if they told anybody. So that $500 prediction was reacting to the fact that the capacity that's normally in that market has been consumed because the manufacturer doubled their production at that facility. So now the capacity is being sucked in from other markets and the price went up. So, and that was in a matter, I think this was a Tuesday and they doubled their production on Monday. So in a matter of really hours, if you will, through the data, the algorithm picked up on the fact that, wow, okay, the capacity's dried up in this market that's normally flush with capacity and the prices are going up.
And it knew that because that shipper must have sent additional loads to another provider and the network rate then caught that. Is that what it's
Yep, yep,
essentially doing? Interesting.
yep. And it's
Yeah, I mean
also,
that's
so it's seeing that, but then it's also seeing um, rates go up in surrounding areas, surrounding markets as well, right? So if you think about the fact, okay, I have this remote market that has, a normal level of capacity, but then there might be some other major markets around it that suddenly prices and volume in those major markets are starting to go up, right? So capacity is being sucked out of those markets somewhere. Where is it? And these are the types of things that I like to say, AI is just think of your best broker on your floor. And now your best broker on your floor might not understand that, right? But in a normal pricing scenario, what are the mental gyrations that your most experienced broker is going to go through when they're trying to price a load? Maybe a lane they've never priced before, right? They're going to go look at adjacent markets. They're going to go look at load history. They're going to go look at all of these other things. They might call a couple carriers to see where carriers are bidding, but it's going to take them, I don't know, at best 20 minutes maybe to do all that. Worst
Hmm.
case, maybe a couple hours. The machine learning is doing exactly the same thing, right? It's looking at adjacent markets and what's happening. It's looking at lanes that have similar characteristics. It's looking at all of these different things, but it's giving you an answer a sub-second response time with a lot more data than your most experienced veteran rep could ever process in even a day, right? So you think about 13 million transactions is kind of what's available today for that machine learning to look at. That's one of the things we show our customers. So when we predict a price and the network rate, we don't just show them that particular lane, that particular market. We also show them the pricing dynamics for similar lanes, right? So that similar could be adjacent markets, or it could be a lane that's not even in an adjacent market, but it behaves similarly from a data perspective to the lane that you're pricing. And users can see that visually in our user interface as well.
I mean, this is gets to the root of, I guess, kind of the conversation around digital brokerage versus traditional, and kind of what I believed is a spectrum. I never believed in the full digital brokerage model where it's you can kind of fully
Same.
replace a lot of those kind of human roles, because that relationship piece is so important, and both
Yeah.
the carrier and customer feel like they need to have someone there to support them. And so my concept and what we wanted to build at Molo was, find and hire the best people and train them as well as we can, and then arm them with the best tools possible to make them as efficient as possible. Your business is what we're talking about here. I
Yeah.
mean, that's that, and it gets into the concept of build versus buy. But I guess what we're getting to here is that even if you were to build at the $3-4 billion mark, your Google search history example starts to come into play there, where you can only build so much versus you've kind of created this weird, not weird, but the very unique niche,
Yeah.
where it's kind of the Greenscreens network, and there's enough buy-in that there's a lot of freight there that gives you more buying power, so to speak, or at least network understanding than
Right.
even CH Robinson. I mean, they're not even that big as you think
Right.
about that. So um, that's just fascinating to me. I don't know that I have a question tied to that comment. I
Yeah,
don't know if you
no,
have any feedback
it's
there.
pretty exciting. And going back to the automation and the digital freight brokers thing, I'm 100% with you. I never thought that the process could ever be fully automated. To your point, relationships are just way, way too important. But I like to say it's man plus machine, not man versus machine. And one of the favorite quotes I've seen, I don't even know who said it, but it was, look, AI technology isn't going to replace you. A human using AI technology to make better decisions will replace you, right? And that's kind of the have versus the have-nots. And our job isn't to replace the human, it's to empower the human to make better decisions faster and to help our customers to make better use of their human capital. I mean, from an automation perspective, yes, there are things, tasks that can be automated, but that it's not everything, right? There still needs to be that jackpot lane so that I can have a human conversation. But, take that seasoned veteran carrier rep or customer rep and allow them to focus not on pricing freight, but on building relationships with customers and getting to better understand that customer's business, or how can they establish more synergies with the carrier, right? Like those types of things. Those are the people that you want doing that. And think about the time it takes. So you've run a brokerage, you know how long it takes to train a new rep, right? To get them good at pricing freight.
A long time.
Months, a year, a long time. We have some of our customers that they now are to the point that as part of their S&OP, they can put a new rep in a chair pricing freight in weeks, not months, right? Because now those reps are told you must tell you, do what,
follow the
yeah, follow what Greenscreens tells you, and they will be monitored on that. But it takes that ramp up time on a new rep down so that you can start deploying your more seasoned people who used to, everybody would go to them. Andrew, how would you price this? Andrew, how would you price this? They can actually manage and be more strategic now instead of having to price everybody's freight, right?
So you mentioned integrations with 13 TMSs, and something that I've seen that I'm always curious about now is there seems to be this kind of partnership. I don't want to say war, but like this, it almost feels like Game of Thrones esque, where everyone's kind of choosing sides and who they partner with. For one, and there's a couple elements to this. So for one, it's like once a day I go on LinkedIn and I see a company announce their latest partnership with someone else. And I look at it and I'm like, are you really doing anything between you two, or did you guys just decide to say you're partners? But two, I do feel like there is some kind of side choosing happening. So what's your perspective on where are you guys at in kind of your partnership arena? Are you guys defending the North, or just kidding? That's a Game of Thrones reference.
No, I know. We are exclusively non-exclusive, is what I would say to that. So look, I think that working as an ecosystem and giving our customers optionality is the way that we all win, right? So think about my TMS, 20 years in TMS, trying to build a very deep, very broad TMS solution in many different places that was all things to all people and did everything. And I'm here to tell you it's impossible. You can't do everything well, right? So I think that the TMS of the future is really more TMS becomes the operating platform, and there are a lot of best in breed task specific applications that bolt on to the TMS right now. So that's part of it. The other part of it is even within those best in breed task specific applications, it's not one size fits all, right? I mean, the tracking product that is good for one company might not be good for the next company, and so on. So our approach is really, look, by working together, we're all going to be better together, right? If we connect, if we're in the TMS ecosystem, but it's not just in TMS. We just recently launched what we call capacity on tap, right? Which we're working with Highway and Cargo Chief and Truck Stop and ISO Technologies and Yat, and we have probably 3 or 4 more that are coming, and I probably missed one, and if I did, I'm sorry if you're listening. But where it answers for us the question that our customers would say is, look, we love your pricing, we believe in your pricing, but I still need to go get a truck. Like, I still need to go get a truck. So how do I get access to that capacity outside of my network, outside the carriers that haul for that? And sure, we could have gone and built a capacity solution or whatever, but it's like there are people out there that already do this really well, right? Why don't we focus on doing what we do extraordinarily well and partner with the people who do what they do extraordinarily well? And that's really what capacity on tap is taking Greenscreen's rating intelligence and putting that together in a single pane of glass with all of these people who do capacity really well, right? Allows them to hopefully ditch the load boards, reduce fraud, make their users more efficient, reducing clicks, reducing browser tabs, like all of these things, reducing app fatigue, and kind of bringing that all together. And so what side am I taking? I'm not taking a side. No, not north, not south. It's really, we really do want to partner with everybody. And, it has to make business sense for both parties and add value for both parties. But look, my head of partnerships has done a phenomenal job building. It's been our strategy since the beginning, but Matt Silver, the other Matt Silver,
I was like, wait, what?
yeah, no, not that Matt Silver. So Matthew Silver, formerly of Trucker Tools, is our Matt Silver who has built out our partnership
I
program.
didn't know you had a Matt Silver.
We do have a
obviously
Matt Silver.
That's confusing.
Yes,
Okay.
so it's very confusing. It's funny when I met Matt, your brother, I was like, oh, you're the other Matt Silver. I don't think he liked that very much, but anyway, it was a joke. He's done a phenomenal job of building out our partnership program and just really bringing it all together. So in my past life, there were a lot of what I called Barney partnerships. I love you, you love me, let's put out a press release. That there was really no substance to them at all, right? There was no
There are a
integration.
lot
There
of
was
those.
Yes, there are, but that is not our relationship. We are integrated, again, the 13 TMSs, AVRL, Tabby, Bitfreighter, Cargo Chief, Highway, and the integrations are generally two-way, data and user experience, right? So it's a really full, robust integration that we're pursuing. And we've developed the tools to make that easy for our partners, right? So we have a UI developers toolkit that allows for our partners or our customers that have a proprietary TMS to easily take our entire user experience or even little pieces of our user experience and plug it right into their TMS, right? Without having to do a lot of development and coding on their own. We have a full set of APIs. But in the vein of meeting our customers and our partners where they are, we also have less sophisticated, if you will, ways of integrating as well, because it's more important to us that we kind of proliferate that ecosystem and get the green screens right out there in front of everybody, um, than it is to make it difficult to do business with.
So you mentioned you've had conversations with shippers. Is there a product being built for shippers then too? Is that part of the roadmap, or how are you
So
thinking about that?
we are, yes, but not the same product that we offer to brokers today. And that's our commitment to our brokers is we will never sell against you and we will always continue to enhance and better our product offering for the broker market. Though I think that there's a huge opportunity in the market to get to more, to kind of change the way we do procurement as an industry, if you will, right? I think if we learned anything from the pandemic, it's that, we've spent decades optimizing our supply chain for reducing costs, but not enough thought about reducing risk and being more resilient, right, to a black swan event like that. And I think that the astronomical rates that we saw in 2020 and 2021, and then the trough that we're in now, I think there is an opportunity to will never eliminate the volatility, but reduce the volatility through a more collaborative procurement process that is able to look at long-term markets, short-term markets. Look, there are some markets that, regardless of the market conditions, are fairly stable, right? There's always going to be some volatility, but they're fairly stable. Does this market, should it go to a long-term contract based on that stability versus other markets that are a little bit more volatile that in these market conditions maybe negotiate a short-term contract or go right to spot with it. So those types of tools, but then also the tools that allow for the shippers to get more access to our brokers directly from their TMS, right? So to be able to, again, some of the things that the Echoes and the Convoys and the Uber Freights through API connectivity into the shipper TMSs are able to instantly quote, or as a user at a shipper is rate shopping a load, right? Why not have the ability for Greenscreens brokers to opt in to be able to share their pricing with a Greenscreen shipper, right? Who is also connected. So that's the way we're looking at the shippers. It's not to sell against the brokers or to give the shippers intelligence into what the brokers are, how they're pricing, but it's really more to uh, help them help each other and
Yep.
through more collaboration, right?
So it's a delicate dance, but it's one
Yeah.
that I think you can do if you do it the right way. I think it's important to remain neutral.
Yeah.
I think that's a mistake that a lot of companies, well, I don't even know if it's a mistake because I think some of them do it on purpose, but
Yeah.
there are a lot of companies out there that, want the world to think they're neutral, and they're secretly doing stuff like running their own brokerage, adjacent to a business that's taking in a lot of brokerage data, things like that. I assume you're comfortable saying that's never in your pipeline to start a brokerage,
100%.
because that would be foolish given what seems like a really
Yes.
nice niche that you've built for
My mouth
yourself
to
here.
God's ears, not happening. Yeah.
You'd be surprised. I've seen other interesting businesses that for whatever reason feel like they should get into brokerage just because it's the easiest way to get revenue. And I'm hopeful that this recent wave of both the market and some of the bankruptcies or whatever that we're seeing is wising people up to kind of how they market their businesses
Yeah.
and think about growing their businesses, and be
Well,
a broker or don't be a broker, but don't try to do both.
Well, here's the thing though. I think that now the investor community has gotten wise to it. So I think that's helping that along as well. Because when you had companies that were effectively freight brokers getting valuations as a software company because of the way they marketed themselves, that did not help the situation. But I think we've learned a lot this year, and the investment investor community has as well. Um, they know the questions to ask and they know what to look for there for sure.
You'd hope so. You never know. We'll see.
Yeah,
I'm hopeful we're past that point
I hope so.
of all that stuff. So I guess as you think about what else is there coming in the future here for Greenscreens, as you look towards future growth plans outside of, I guess, the shipper approach,
Yeah.
what more is in your pipeline?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of really exciting things coming up next year. I mean, long-term forecasting, as I mentioned earlier, we're really focused on that short-term spot market, but long-term forecasting is an area that we're getting into both for contract and for spot rates and strategic pricing. So today, from a pricing to the shipper perspective, we're pretty transactional, right? So it's the customer sales reps and more transactional usage. But we have some tools coming out early next year that really kind of elevate it up to the next level of those who are setting pricing strategy and giving them the tools they need to be able to do that more dynamically. So, as an example, if you this week want to optimize in a particular market for volume instead of margin, being able to kind of do some what ifing scenarios, pull a few levers, find the scenario that you like, and really quickly optimize or operationalize that rather into the hands of those who are actually on the floor pricing freight. Or, maybe it's for a customer in a given market, or you don't want to take any more freight out of the Pacific Northwest because for whatever reason, jack the margins up and push that out, right? So those are some of the things that we have coming out. Obviously, now that we've assembled so much data, it's really farming the secondary value of, or the primary value of that data is to give some more elevated market analytics. So again, not being quite so transactional, but to really kind of give the bigger picture market. With the long-term forecasting too, it kind of ties back into pricing because if you're a freight broker and you're bidding, you're participating in a shipper bid and you want to earn a spot on that shipper's routing guide, you're most likely going to be betting against contract freight rates as well. So being able to kind of get that understanding simultaneously of here's what we think the spot market's going to do, here's what we think the contract market's going to do over the next year so that you can price so that yeah, you're pricing according to the spot market, but you're still pricing well enough to earn yourself a spot in that routing guide against asset-based carriers, right? So kind of giving some of those types of tools to the broker community as well. I'm trying to think, so, we're going to continue to build out the capacity on tap solution. We are the first and only pricing vendor that actually does multi-stop pricing now. So
Really?
yes, we do multi-stop
How
pricing now.
how do you do that effectively? Because routing and timing and appointments are really important in getting that pricing done right.
Sure. Yeah, sure. It is. So we're not optimizing the route, we're not creating the route, right? But as the route is input to us using the data that we have available, and we're going to look at things like stop count, we're going to look at distance, and we're going to look at time, and again using all of that data and the machine learning to do the price predictions. And
Can
we
you get facility data in there too, to a place where, I'm just thinking big picture, long term. If you get to a place where you understand all the facilities, you understand their regular appointment times, you maybe even get to a place where you understand what these brokers get from these appointments, because then you can understand. Because like the problem is if it's a Chicago to Cincinnati to Orlando, ideally, I don't know if that's the right route to do it in. So let's say it's Chicago to
yeah,
Chattanooga to Orlando. Ideally, that's I'm going to pick Monday in Chicago. I'm going to do Tuesday in Chattanooga, and I'm going to do Wednesday in Orlando. But if you find out Chicago only loads till noon
right.
or till 2, and then what's it
Yeah.
called? Chattanooga is nighttime only, and Orlando's morning only. Then that's now a 4-day instead of a 3-day.
Yeah.
You get what I'm kind of getting at
Yeah, no, I
in
totally
conversation?
get it. And we're not there yet. So number one, we don't have facility information. We do predict to the 5-digit zip codes, right? So it's not just city, state, 3-digit or market. We are predicting to the 5-digit zip codes. So in the areas where they're not dense, right, with or with shippers, getting to the 5-digit zip code is sometimes going to get us close enough to understanding some of those dynamics. Now, that being said, we're not building the routes, right? We are pricing based on the information we're given. So if somebody says I'm picking up in Chicago on Monday at 6 o'clock and I'm picking up in Chattanooga on Wednesday at 2 o'clock and I need to deliver, so we're not validating the feasibility of that
Got it.
route. And we are pricing line haul only. So we don't, it will, we'll consider stop offs in that as well, but any other type of detention layovers or whatever. But the presumption right now is we're not checking the feasibility of the route that we're being given. We're just assuming that the route we're being given is feasible and we're going to price it accordingly. So,
Got it. That makes sense.
yeah.
Okay. Um, anything else there in the pipeline? Sorry, I cut you off to ask that question
No, no,
about.
no, no. I appreciate it. I mean, there is a lot. We are putting together our plans for next year, but it's really focused again about, elevating the analytics to, not quite the operational level. Oh, one more thing we have coming out, we're doing agent functionality. So being able to, if you're a brokerage with an agent model, being able to kind of still aggregate your data of your full brokerage and give your different agents visibility to it while not exposing customer information and things like that, right? So it's just another layer of security that kind of allows some of these bigger companies to still use all of their data, but give tools to their agents that aren't going to kind of give away somebody else's playbook, if you will, right? Another agent's
Yeah,
playbook, but still getting an understanding of that. So I'm trying
it's
to think.
interesting.
Had,
Just you mentioned the agent model. I was thinking about that as we were talking about kind of the build versus buy concept. It's like there's a world where you could start a brokerage these days and purely just build out the sales force
mhm,
and buy all of the tools elsewhere and start create the partnerships. Like you talk about capacity on tap is what kind of got that going for me, is like build out a whole carrier network type thing. Eventually I feel like you'll be able to buy something like that or
right.
have a partnership with something like that. Who knows what that looks like in 5 years, but it's just kind of fascinating where the industry's going and how, um, you have to make those choices of what do I want to build internally versus what do I want to buy off the
Right.
market, because one, either I don't want to build the tool, or two, even building the tool won't give me the depth or breadth of buying power or network power that a tool like Greenscreens maybe has.
Right.
So
Yeah, I
it's
mean, look, going on that point, going back to the capacity on tap and why we chose to not try to build it ourselves. Number one, there, as I said, there are people out there that do it really well. But if you talk to the people that are in the capacity business, that some of them have been in business for many, many years, the one thing they all struggle with is getting the capacity to their platform. So, kind of my position was we could build this tomorrow, but how long is it going to take us for us to get enough capacity to be meaningful, right? Just like with Greenscreens as a rating engine, it took us, a couple of years before we had enough data to be meaningful to some of these people. So I think you're right on with that. Sorry, I just looked at my roadmap. A couple more things. So today we're van, reefer, flatbed. We're seeing a lot of demand from our customers to look at some other more specialized modes or methods of transportation. So in our roadmap for this year, we're looking at partials, we're looking at hotshot, sprinter van type stuff. We're looking at, hazmat specific predictions, right? So, and the way we kind of go about this with the data science is we say, okay, how much data do we have? Okay, we have plenty of hotshot data. Let's test it, right? Can we build a model for hotshot? And is it within our quality standards, right? Are we comfortable with it? So those are some, and I also said earlier, the R part of the R&D sometimes takes longer. Those are the
mm-hmm.
types of things that we're doing is we just study the data we have. Can we do something with the data? If not, what additional data do we need and can our customers give us that? And then start collecting that data. So those are some of the other things we're looking at. And Mexico. Mexico is kind of the next thing for the end of the year ish.
Nice.
Hmm.
So what will success look like to you in this business?
That is a great question. Look, success in this business is we have a very large, we've captured a very large share of the market. Going back to your question about what percentage do we think we can, I don't know what that percentage is. Our win rate right now is like 57%, which is ridiculous in a good way. Um, but the market is so huge, right? With 150 customers, we've just barely scratched the surface of what we can do. But success in this business to me is if we truly can be the catalyst for changing the way the industry does procurement and making it a more dynamic, collaborative process that, again, is never going to eliminate the volatility of the market cycles, but kind of minimizes its impact, right? In these cycles where right now the shippers are, have the upper hand, and, hopefully 2 years from now, the brokers are going to have the upper hand. And I mean, that stupid back and forth it's ridiculous, right? So I think success to me is if we can figure out a way to kind of give the technology that enables that change in the industry.
Very
That's my
nice.
answer. Yeah.
That's a great answer. And
Thank you.
one more question that I probably should have been at the front of the interview, or at least the front of the conversation about green screens. Why the name green screens?
Okay. Everybody asks that question. So the name I inherited it, and I've learned to embrace it. We can't change it now. We have way too much brand momentum behind it. But the thought process there is, if you think about the fact that in general, the freight industry, or until pretty recently, has been pretty antiquated from a technology perspective, right? Not very forward thinking. Um, so green screens being like an AS400 mainframe computer, right? Dot AI. So the concept there is kind of taking some new novel technology to an antiquated or technologically antiquated practice process. And green is the color of money too. So, and
You added that
that
piece.
I did well because we save our customers money or make them more money. So that's, yeah, I did add that piece, but I think it works.
I think green screen. I think the thing they put to behind you on television to change your background.
Well, when I first joined the company and started doing market research and, search engine optimization type stuff, I would search it and we would get a lot of that. But apparently there's several marijuana dispensaries with that name too, or paraphernalia shops. So yeah, I used to, in the early days, I would say, yes, we are not a video production company, nor are we a marijuana dispensary. Don't forget the AI on the end, or you might end up somewhere you don't want to. So yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this has been really awesome. I didn't even realize we've been talking for almost 2 hours here.
I know. Good
It's been
stuff.
great. I think we can wrap it there unless you've got anything you want to add.
No, sir. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much to our
Yeah.
listeners. I hope you enjoyed the show. I think this is going to be a video episode. I'm going to put that out there. I don't think we have any editing needed. So this could be the first time we
Damn.
just go front to back, put the whole thing on the internet and let them see us live. Because I've had a lot of people ask, and the reason we historically haven't done videos because of the need to edit stuff, and I'm trying to get away from that. So could be
Okay.
first. So
All right.
appreciate you so
Awesome,
much,
man. Well,
Dawn. It's been
yeah,
great.
thank you. And stay in touch.
Will do.
All right. Thanks.
See ya.
Take care.